what's amazing to me about the Olympics is that everybody has a fascinating story. There are no boring Olympians.
Mesdames et messieurs, the greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
This is going to be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! Go! Oh!
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant! But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello, fans of TKFLASTAN, and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. I am your host, Jill Jaracz, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you today?
I have a story for you.
You do?
I do. So I went swimming, and I was thinking of Jacqueline Simoneau, and I was thinking about when I was a kid. I used to think it was really fun to do handstands in the water and little flips. So I tried to do a little flip under the water, and when I stood back up, I almost threw up.
Oh, no!
I was so dizzy and so nauseous from this one little underwater flip.
Wow.
So, as if we didn't know the artistic swimmers were amazing enough for their strength and the disorientation and vertigo when you flip underwater, that doesn't bother you when you're 7, is really serious because you lose your equilibrium with what's up and what's down. I do not recommend it over the age of 12.
Now I want to go swimming and try it and do the handstands.
Just be prepared. Be prepared.
I will report back. Speaking of reporting, we got our Team USA Oreos in the house.
With the sparkles, the bursting sparkles?
Yeah, the generic version of Pop Rocks, popping candy. You know what's fun? Is sharing your Oreos with somebody who doesn't know the popping candy is in there. Because Ben was like, oh, there's popping candy in them. I thought I was having a stroke. Because his mouth just started, and it takes like 2 seconds for them to kick in. So do
not eat one of those in the swimming pool when you're doing a flip, because you will give yourself a stroke, apparently.
Oh, but that was I would say totally cool, because that was a lot of fun. So if you're going to share your Oreos, don't tell somebody about the Pop Rocks and see what happens.
But did they taste good?
Yeah, they taste fine. I think obviously they don't look as good as they do in the photographs because food stylists and food photographers do magic in making images. I think it's more of a double stuff, and they took the doubled part and kind of halved that to make the red and the blue. I look at the red, white, and blue layers and think that should be a triple stuff Oreo. But I think it's really double stuff in size.
That was too much math for my adult spun brain.
I hear you. It's hard to think about, but yeah, I do enjoy them. The Pop Rocks are fun.
I have people in my house who I could put an Oreo in front of them and they would absolutely ask no questions. So I have a plan.
Oh, excellent. I want to hear all about that. Well, speaking of totally fun things, our guest today is totally interesting. He is Jeremy Fuchs, author of the book Total Olympics, Every Obscure, Hilarious, Dramatic, and Inspiring Tale Worth Knowing. We talked with Jeremy about the book and some of the fun facts throughout Olympic history. Take a listen. Jeremy, we always get the question, why do you have a podcast about the Olympics? So how about for you? Why'd you write this book?
I've been Olympic obsessed for as long as I can remember. There's I wish wasn't a true story, but there's a true story of me probably after the 2004 Olympics, hoping that I could learn how to pole vault so I could join the Olympics. I was probably about 12. I have no athletic ability, which I knew at the time, but I figured, hey, can't be that hard, right? It is. I just love it. It's something that becomes my life for 2 weeks every few years. It's a combination of things for me. It's the amazing, obviously, athletes and, these performances. It's the ability to see different sports that you don't usually get to see. And then it's just, as a sports nerd, having 24-hour sports is always not a bad thing either. And so for me, it's sort of a perfect storm. And so I think by the end of 2 weeks, my friends and family are kind of tired of me watching so much. But I just love it. I love watching. I think my favorite part is just watching things I don't get to watch. We can all watch basketball and baseball, pretty much year round. Can't really watch cross country skiing, at least not in the U.S. So to be able to take all of that sort of passion and put it into a book was awesome for me and really exciting, and just gave me a chance to sort of geek out year round.
Okay, so I have a question. You've also written for Sports Illustrated, so you are a
Yes.
member of the media as well. Why is it that media outlets don't necessarily write about the smaller sports continuously?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's definitely a few reasons. I mean, surely some of it is the economics. There's no broadcast deal for most of these sports. Maybe you'll get a world championship here and there, but really not. It's really only kind of goes to the swimming level, and like that's about it. That's certainly part of it. Take a sport. I use cross country as an example, just because it's something I enjoy watching, and I think it's a good example because it's a predominantly European sport. We're not sending journalists to Finland to cover, the Americans race in the middle, the dead of winter. I think as an American media in particular, we're sort of trained on sort of the big four sports, maybe a little bit of soccer, maybe some few things here and there, but to go sort of outside that comfort zone really only seems to happen at the Olympics. And even then, it only really happens when it's, either an American star or, in recent years, swimming and gymnastics. You don't see many of the sports on primetime. You only see, the swimmings and the gymnastics and track and fields of the world. Personally, I wish that would change, but, it's been so entrenched for so many years that it's almost not surprising.
Yeah, that's kind of. Ginny Thrasher was on our show a few weeks ago, and when she won the first gold of the Rio Games, all of a sudden everybody knew who she was because she won the first gold, and then we all became experts in air rifle. But
Yeah.
It's really kind of interesting how the resources aren't there, or just trying to gain importance. And like you mentioned, cross country with Jessie Diggins winning the Tour de Ski this year, then it got a little bit more prominence. But it's tough, and it's hard when you want to see something like modern pentathlon or taekwondo on a regular basis, and you just can't.
Yeah, and I think the problem also is that if you ask most people what modern pentathlon is, they might not know, and probably aren't able to name all 5 sports or all 5 disciplines within that. Same thing with decathlon or heptathlon, all the thons. I think the Jessie Diggins thing is really interesting because I was surprised, and this was this kind of iconic moment, or should have been an iconic moment in U.S. sports history. Not only was it an amazing race, there was that amazing call to go along with it, and it was, just this big event. And, now Jessie Diggins is probably one of the top cross-country skiers in the world. She's going to be, you would think, a huge star for Beijing in 2022. And again, I bet if you ask a lot of people, they probably don't even know who she is. And so we have a lot of work to do in sort of elevating some of these sports, particularly the ones that Americans are good at. It's one thing to say, oh, we're not going to watch table tennis, where, no American has ever gone anywhere, but we have sports that are not the traditional sports that Americans are good at. And you would sort of hope they would be highlighted more than they are. But, time and time again, it's the big sport and the biggest names that get the most attention, and not the little things that are, to me, just as fascinating, if not more so.
So you filled the book with a lot of little things and a lot of fascinating things. But then you also have some big stories and some very famous Olympians. So what was the decision behind putting the stories in that you did?
Yeah, for me, I definitely gravitate towards some of those smaller, lesser known stories. They interest me as a writer, they interest me as just a person. But I definitely felt that, all right, if you're going to cover the Olympics, there are certain things that you can't not write about, that a book would not be complete without writing about Michael Phelps or Mark Spitz. Even though those are known quantities and their stories are, obviously well known, I sort of took the challenge of trying to find things that maybe were a little bit lesser known about their stories. Michael Phelps' first Olympics in Sydney when he was 15 years old is not, obviously he didn't win anything there, so no one really knows as much about that. And so that was sort of my approach. I wanted to create a book that sort of covered the entirety of the Olympic experience, everything from everything we know to all the things that you don't know and I think you should know. And my hope was to maybe approach some of the more well-known stories in a familiar but also somewhat different way, and then bring some of those lesser known stories to light. And, in doing so, hoping to create, what I think is a pretty full picture of the Olympic experience that covers sort of every side.
Did you know or heard pieces of a lot of the stories you included, or did you have a lot of surprises as you were researching the book?
Tons of surprises.
Okay, so what was the biggest surprise? What story really just said, I can't believe that happened?
Well, the biggest, it's almost like a series of stories. The biggest surprise for me was how unorganized the early Olympics were. From 1896 to like the 1920s. They were sort of a mess. They were trying to fit, we take the Olympics for granted. I think the fact that, you can turn on the TV and 24/7, there's a sport, it's on 8 channels and everything's on, everything's online. The early days, they didn't really know what sports would go where. One of my favorite stories is the story of Margaret Abbott, who's the first American female to win a gold medal in golf in 1900 in Paris. She had no idea she was competing in the Olympics. She died never knowing. A researcher from the University of Florida, was doing research on women in the Olympics, contacted her family and saying, trying to get more information. They had no idea. That's how chaotic the Olympics were. You could participate in the Olympics and not know about it. And so that to me was fascinating. We just think that the Olympics are this well-oiled machine and have been since the beginning, and they really haven't. There was just chaos, particularly the first few games, but even going into the 40s and 50s, it wasn't what we expect nowadays. And I think to me that was so fascinating, because usually when you have chaotic things like that, they don't last. Chaotic things tend to break down, and the Olympics didn't. If anything, they got bigger and more lavish and, more costly and, gained more prominence worldwide. So learning that history to me was fascinating. Learning how it sort of went from this idea in someone's head to this worldwide phenomenon that we devote all our attention to and people spend tons of money on. That to me was incredibly fascinating and something that I had really no idea about.
And you have a whole section on legends, which is some of those much better known stories. So why pick one over another? Because you include, like you said, Michael Phelps, but then you also included Larissa Latinina, who most Americans have never heard of or only heard of because of her relation to the record with Michael Phelps.
Yeah, it was really hard to choose. And I had to make, there's a version of the book somewhere that's like double in length. I could have written about every amazing Olympic athlete, and I would probably still be writing. So for me, it was just trying to find who could I say something new about, who could I find, some insight, some unique insight that, maybe hasn't been written about. I wish it was more scientific than that, but, I think the toughest part about writing a book is knowing when to stop and knowing when to cut. And then when I was sort of halfway through writing it and I was already past my word count, like some decisions had to be made. But yeah, I could have written about every gold medalist ever. Everybody, what's amazing to me about the Olympics is that everybody has a fascinating story. There are no boring Olympians. They all sort of come from somewhere. They often persevere against whether it's injury, personal hardship, economic or political hardship. And then they have this one event and they're the best in the world at it. And that's what made the book so challenging to write. And it's also so fascinating to write, is that all these people are incredible. Even the ones who, maybe have gotten into trouble or have done things wrong, they have these amazing stories. And so it was a real pleasure for me to go through them, learn about them, and then, try to translate it onto the page.
Okay, so you did have to cut a lot. So is there a story that you can share that didn't make the book, that is the one that broke your heart to take out?
Yes, because I had thought it made the book, and then I realized that it didn't, because there was because of COVID, there was a gap. There was a year gap of when it was published. So I sort of put it down and was focusing on COVID. And I was like, oh yeah, I thought I wrote about that, because I did. I looked up and there was a draft in, my folder, but it wasn't actually in the book. So, and the reason I was so surprised is because it's like oddly relevant, but not really. So in 1956, the games were in Melbourne, Australia. Actually, it was a big success. It was one of the biggest successes at the time. Everything was great. Everything was a hit except for equestrian. Australia had a 6-month horse quarantine. So any horse that entered the country had a quarantine for 6 months, which they didn't tell the Olympic Committee in their bid, which I'm sure would not have gone over well. They were unwilling to budge, I guess to their credit. I don't know. So they had to find a alternative location for equestrian. So they chose Sweden. Not really sure why, but they chose Stockholm. They had hosted the Olympics before. And so they had just equestrian in Stockholm. They had an opening ceremony. Queen Elizabeth from England was there. They had all the pomp and circumstance of a regular Olympics, but just for equestrian. And I just found that fascinating because like of all sports to have all the pomp and circumstance and its own opening ceremony for equestrian, which is like one of the least watched, and especially here. And then I think I was so disappointed because of the quarantine took on new relevance, obviously, in the last 18 months. And it wasn't a person quarantine, but a horse quarantine. And I thought, as I was sort of watching the pandemic unfold, that story stuck out in my head because I was like, well, are they going to have to do that? When the games resume? They still may, for all we know. So yeah, that was a real heartbreaker, just because I've just found it so oddly delightful that they just figured out another place to go, and it worked. It was a huge success, and the rest of the games were. They just part of it happened in a completely different part of the globe.
The other fun thing about those games was that they were in like December because it was their summer, and you never see that today. Even they talk about the heat in Tokyo. Well, the last time Tokyo hosted, they were in the fall.
Yeah, I would, it's so interesting that how things work for TV nowadays. I remember in Beijing, they made it so that Michael Phelps's races would be in prime time, even though it was like morning or like late afternoon or, late morning in Beijing. Yeah, you would think Japan in the summer is going to be brutal, and some of those outside events are not going to be fun. But things have become so, professionalized, and everything is just down to a science that changing things, which is what's going to make this game so fascinating, but changing things is sort of a big deal in a way that in the early games, changing was just, that's all they did was change things up and, experiment and try new things. Nowadays, it's so much more, well organized, and everything's down to a science.
How long did it take you to write this?
So the first draft I had to do, just because of timing, thinking the Olympics were going to come out in 2020, in about 4.5 months. The total book process was probably about a year, with revisions, edits, adding some things, taking out some things, photo research, where there's some amazing photos in the book, illustrations. So yeah, about a year total. The first draft took about 5 months. And then, yeah, we just sort of been waiting. When COVID came, we're like, all right, Olympics are postponed. Like, it doesn't really make much sense. And so it was, we were waiting longer than it actually took to produce, but it was exciting nonetheless for it to come out. And, now we get 2 Olympics sort of back to back. So I think it actually, in a weird way, the timing is going to work out.
Yeah, because you do talk both winter and summer, and some of the winter stories are amazing and fascinating. The whole idea, we talk a lot about the Berlin 32 games, but you have a whole section on the winter games that were also in Germany. In 36, excuse me.
Yeah, this to me was the most, this is probably one of the most fascinating stories for me in the book, because everyone knows the 1936 Berlin Games, the Jesse Owen Games, one of probably the most well-known games. This is sort of Hitler's big debut, I guess, on the world stage. You have the Leni Riefenstahl videos and all these things, right? Jesse Owens has been ingrained in popular culture about sort of destroying the Aryan myth and all those things. They hosted a games in Germany a few months before that, from the Winter Games, in sort of a more industrial town. And what I found so interesting was a few things. One, they were still Nazis. They were not great. They weren't, I feel weird saying this, they didn't go as far as they did in 1936, right? So in 1936, all the Jews were banned from the German team. In the Winter Games, they allowed like a half Jew on the hockey team. There was like less signs of sort of like exclusionary things and sort of Nazi propaganda, but there were still some. The way I sort of formulated was that it was like a trial balloon almost. Like, how far could they go in the Summer Games, which would have gained more attention and were more popular at the time? And Summer Games probably still are more popular. So like they tried some things, it worked. The press bought into a lot of it. There's a lot of really bad, New York Times articles about how great things were. And, it was, for me, it was like, all right, how far can we get without people noticing? And no one really noticed. They went further in 1936 in Berlin. I think they obviously weren't thinking that Jesse Owens was going to go and win 4 gold medals, which sort of tore the whole thing apart. But I think it was so interesting because we don't talk about those games. And I think, obviously the Jesse Owens thing makes the Berlin game so memorable, but they were doing the same exact things, just like 1 degree less. And I think without that sort of breakthrough performance, no one really remembers it or talks about it. And I think it's just as interesting, just as sort of terrifying in many ways, and just as important as a political event. And really one of the first times, everyone talks about in Berlin how politics and sports come together as one. I mean, a few months earlier, the same thing was happening. And I think it's a games that deserves a lot more study and attention and sort of, revisiting, because, we now know how impactful those Berlin Games were, and that would not have happened without the Winter Games in Garmisch-Partenkirchen.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that and think about how they really pushed the envelope, and also just how the Winter Olympics doesn't get the same amount of attention even today.
Yeah, I personally actually prefer I love both, obviously, but I prefer the Winter Olympics. They don't get as much attention. I mean, some of it, it happens in the middle of February. It's summer games. People are off, maybe, at least for part of it. It feels a little bit more festive, as opposed to seeing everybody freezing. But yeah, I think there's definitely more to be written about those early 1936 games in the winter. And I think, we talk so much. We're going to talk about it again in 2022 in Beijing about how politics and the Olympics collide. This was one of the first, World War I, there was games were being canceled. So obviously that was a political thing. But, by then, in 1936, this was really the first major time that politics and the Olympics collided. Nowadays, you can't separate the two. It's impossible. Before then, you kind of could. Even, the 1932 games in LA, the Great Depression, was still sort of separate in some ways. And so, yeah, it's a games that I think to me, have been fascinating to read about and to learn about. I hope through this book gets a little bit more attention.
Is there an athlete that surprised you more so than any other in the stories? I mean, like you say, it's hard because we're going to get 10,500 stories this year that are all going to be interesting, and we're never going to remember most of them. But especially in the first section, because that's one of the things I liked about this book, is that you had these firsts that talk about different countries more so than.
Yeah. Actually, maybe because we were just talking about it, but Jesse Owens actually really surprised me. And I think everyone knows about what he did. He won 4 gold medals. It was a cultural, it's a moment that everyone knows about, an African-American man going into Nazi Germany and winning. And then to me, what the, his sort of section of the book focuses on is coming home. And it's 1936 in America. And so had this happened today, you could imagine the huge superstar he would be. He came home. There was definitely some fanfare for sure. He wasn't invited to the White House. He has a quote, and I'm butchering it, but something along the lines of, you can't eat 4 gold medals. And so he sort of had to, sort of out of necessity, do sort of things that we might consider sideshows, right? So he would race horses. He was a salesman. He was doing all these different things, but he had to make a living, right? And you can only run fast for so long. And he came home and was treated, not the hero's welcome that you would expect from winning 4 gold medals. He was treated like any other African-American was at that point in time, and, for decades, thereafter. And it's a part of his story that doesn't get told. It's a part of his story that I think needs to be told, because it's the realities of that time period in our country. Even people who accomplish amazing things and have a narrative, especially now, of sort of defeating white supremacy, only comes home and his experience is anything but the hero's welcome. And so that was really sort of fascinating, a little painful to read about, that even those who accomplish these, do these amazing, world-beating feats, you come home and things aren't changed. And that comes up a number of times for African-American athletes, especially, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but, obviously throughout our country's history, gold medal feats, right? You win a gold medal in the Olympics, and then you come home and things aren't any better. And so that was fascinating, obviously painful. And I think, again, something that people need to know about, that, just because you're an Olympic hero doesn't mean you come home and things are changed.
You've got another section in the book about discontinued sports, which is always fun to read about because, like you say, back in the day, the Olympics were kind of chaotic, but they also had some wacky stuff. What kind of sports were you surprised to see were part of the games at one point in time?
Yeah, all the sports that were discontinued were weird. I mean, let's just say that up front. There's a reason they were discontinued. And that it was so much fun to write about. Like, especially the early games, newspaper coverage in the early 1900s is fantastic. I mean, it's it's bad in many ways, but it's also fantastic. And the way they would be very colorful in their writing in a way that you don't see today. To me, the biggest surprise by far was art. For like 50 years, they had art, painting, sculpture, architecture, music, literature, you name it, it was there. The idea sort of makes sense. Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern games, definitely had this belief of sort of the mind and body working together in concert. And if you had a strong mind, you had a strong body, and vice versa. And so they had these art competitions, and they sort of continue today, not in a competition sense, but they have sort of these cultural exhibits at every games, in the modern era. But back then, you could win gold, silver, or bronze. There were judge competitions. The reason it stopped, and this was actually took me by surprise, was not because it wasn't a sport, but because these artists, in many cases, were not amateurs. Back then, being an amateur was the biggest thing. If you were not, today, it's like so odd to think about, given some of the obviously professional athletes in many cases. We're going to see the NBA stars, but also the endorsement money that comes. It's hard not to see a commercial that doesn't have Simone Biles or so many of these people. Back then, like, sacrilege. So these artists were professionals, and so that's sort of why it stopped. Not because art and sports, it doesn't really go. And it was so fascinating to me because, first of all, some of these competitions like wouldn't have a gold medal winner, but would have a bronze medal winner, or they would have a silver medalist, but not a gold, not a bronze. And so I feel like if you're the silver medalist, you have to wonder, if no one beat you, are you really the gold medalist? I guess not. You're good, but not that good. And so, I think that was just so odd to me. Like, here's the greatest athletes in the world, and you have a painter. Nothing against painters, but it's not an Olympic sport. And to have that for so many games, so many of these discontinued sports that I talked about were in the Olympics once, maybe twice. Art in the Olympics was there for 40, 50 years. And so even some of these sports that weren't there for that long, or at least had an athletic component to them, obviously art doesn't. So that was fascinating to learn about and read about and investigate, as were all the discontinued sports. I mean, some of them times it was hard to find information about them. You think the Olympics, everything has been written about it. And sometimes there was stuff I couldn't find anything on. There was firefighting at the 1900 Olympics, and there was just nothing on it. I know the Americans won. There was one sentence and one story somewhere, and that was it. And then some of them have been really written about. My personal favorite is called Plunge for Distance, which every year I think people are like, oh, I could do that. I think plunge for distance is the one thing that you could actually do. It was only in one games, again, for good reason. You dive into a pool and you see how far you float without moving. Person who goes the farthest wins. There's a reason, obviously, that didn't stay, but I find that sport fascinating and how that sort of came to be. And I don't know, maybe I could do well in that. Maybe that's why I like it so much, as opposed to the sports you see today. Everyone makes a joke about curling. It's oh, I could do that, and you can't. Obviously, it's really hard. I think maybe that's why they got rid of it, because plunge for distance was too easy. You just see what happens. You just dive and see what happens, and that still boggles my mind. All these, even after writing it and the book coming out, that just is that's awesome to me.
Maybe there's a limit on how far the human body can float.
Well, eventually you stop. Yeah, eventually you stop. You don't just go on forever.
Eventually you die.
Well, that too, yeah. But yeah, I mean, they would just keep going. And the New York Times, again, I think one of the best parts about writing the book was going back into the archives of so many newspapers and magazines, and especially in the early 1900s, when they have the exact quote is in the book. It's something it favors the mere mountains of fat among us, which is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and they just sort of put it out there. But yeah, that to me is one of the best, and if that were to come back, I'd fully support it.
When you did the research, did you read all these old articles in the old-timey voice?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, the plunge for distance.
That was the best part. I mean, I love doing historical research in general, which is part of the reason why I was attracted to this book. But yeah, those articles are so bad but so good, and some of the information trying to extract stuff from it is it's just written sometimes in what seems like a different language.
What are you excited about for Tokyo?
It's been so weird, because I've been asked this obviously a number of times about what's going to happen in Tokyo, and I am on one hand so incredibly excited, especially sort of having obviously been robbed of it for 1 year. I'm also conflicted. I don't know if you guys feel that way. I feel like it's going to be very odd and sort of I don't know, holding my breath a little bit. not just just the thought that an athlete might have to miss, or people obviously getting really sick and worse. It's just that sort of specter over it is so uncomfortable. But at the same time, I think it's going to be hard not to enjoy it, just because I think we haven't had that type of event, obviously, in a long time. We've been waiting a while for it, obviously a little bit longer than usual. I think for me, in the summer, my favorite events, I do love swimming. Yes, it's not a sport I really watch outside of the Olympics, but it has sort of the drama that makes, for great entertainment and great sports. Same thing with track and field. I really enjoy the basketball. As somebody who's sort of a casual NBA fan, I find I actually enjoy it more, sort of seeing it in a different light. I think people need to know how good the Americans are at water polo, both men's and women, sort of dominant. The same thing with women's rowing. This is a sport I enjoy watching. The women's 8 team is just beyond dominant. That'll be a lot of fun to watch. I think getting a chance to see, a legend like Simone Biles is just really cool to have that experience, to see the best of all time, probably in her prime, is just kind of awesome. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. There's a lot to sort of be concerned about, a lot to just like, all right, are we going to get through this? Are people going to be okay? Is it going to be weird with no fans there, very limited fans there? I was reading today they can't really make any noise. The fans who are allowed, which I don't know how you police that, but it's going to be very different. It's going to be obviously a little bit uncomfortable, but at the same time, I think there's going to be enough that'll make obviously people, keep watching. But at the same time, like, we're going to have to, hold our breath just a little bit, which is going to make for something obviously that we've never experienced before.
Out of the 5 new sports, or quote unquote new sports, because we have some of returning sport in the program, what are you most looking forward to? Yeah,
well, I would say baseball, but I'm not sure that qualifies because it's a returning sport. 3-on-3 basketball should be really interesting. It's like, again, it's very clear that the IOC is trying to get younger viewers, younger fans, which makes sense. You see surfing and skateboarding and, some of the winter events like the big air event and snowboarding. And 3-on-3, I think, is another way to do that. I think it'll be interesting just because it's sort of an odd format for the sport. You kind of think about just like pick up basketball with your friends and playing 3-on-3, in a way that you kind of can't do with any of these other sports. I don't know. It'll be interesting. And I think I'll be really curious to see if any of the 3-on-3 stars, particularly from the US, but even around the world, it's like, all right, can they parlay this into like an NBA career? Would be interesting to me. Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see. And also just like see it juxtaposed against the traditional basketball, which is going to have some big stars. I think it'll be interesting to see what sort of play it gets, because it's, it's basketball. It's, basketball is one of the biggest sports there, and it's like the weird cousin. So that'll be interesting to see how that sort of plays out, and I'll be curious to watch it and really see it for the first time, at least at a high level.
You also include the Paralympics here and there in the book.
Yes.
How do you think the world, or at least the country here in the US, how we're starting to see the Paralympics?
I think it's awesome. We have so much work to do in terms of making the Paralympics more mainstream. The fact that they're on TV, I think, is incredible. I imagine most people sort of tune out for the Paralympics. You are starting to get more coverage. Some of the stars are starting to become, more part of the regular Olympic coverage, particularly in the trials. I don't think people realize how awesome the Paralympics are. Getting a chance to write about some of the athletes in the Paralympics was unbelievable. You think, you're dealing with people who have probably some of the most perseverance out there, and unbelievable athletes just doing unbelievable things. I hope that we can start to cover it and watch it and just sort of talk about it a little bit more. Everybody was talking, obviously, the Oscar Pistorius, not the later Oscar Pistorius, but the Olympian Oscar Pistorius part. And I think people were sort of intrigued by that. But if you want to see more of that, just wait after the Olympics and watch the whole thing. You get some different events, you get some of the same events. The great thing about the Olympics that I just love more than anything is being able to see people from all walks of life. Everyone made fun. Everyone was sort of, the internet was ablaze with that Tongan guy who was all covered in oil, but it's a way to see different cultures, right? And different walks of life. And you sort of see, particularly in countries that we don't know much about, whether it's the traditional dress or whatever, the same thing applies to the Paralympics. There are people from different walks of life who are dealing with things that maybe we don't have experience with or too much exposure to. And so if we think of the Olympics as more than a sporting event, as sort of this cultural event, as sort of a history lesson, sort of this crash course in world culture and history, and it's like the best way to learn about these things because you're watching sports, but you're also learning. I think people get a lot more out of it, and that's how I try to approach just watching it and writing about it. We're learning and we're seeing so many things that we just don't get to see on a daily basis. Yes, professional sports are much more globalized than they used to be, and the NBA has all these amazing international players, but they're talking about on the court stuff. By and large, this is a chance to learn sort of what happens off it. I think the Paralympics are just another representation of that. Just gaining more exposure to different types of people from different backgrounds from all over the world, and how they sort of all work to do something incredible. And yeah, I hope we start to do more of it. We're obviously not anywhere close, and I include some Paralympians. I certainly could have included a whole lot more. And so I hope that we can start talking a little bit more. And there's some just amazing stories in the Paralympics, just like the Olympics, and it deserves all that coverage and more.
So what is next for you? Are you going to write more Olympic stuff, or?
Yeah, TBD exactly. I would love to keep writing about the Olympics and sort of this quasi-historical lens that I've sort of applied to it. Like I said earlier on, there's so many more stories that we haven't talked about, or stories that got a little bit of attention in the book and are probably worth more. Yeah, for me, I think it's something that's a lifelong endeavor. Is just writing and learning and exploring the Olympics as a sports writer, but just putting sort of this historical cultural lens is something that I don't think I'll ever stop doing.
Okay, games are 17 days long. What are your strategies for watching them and the endurance of the event?
Yeah, I mean, you got to stretch and stay hydrated, have the proper snackage nearby. I think you have to, the most important thing is to not be discouraged when people tell you to turn the channel. I remember very vividly in college, the Olympics, it was really only not an issue, but it was really only a thing. It only occurred once with the Winter Games when I was in college. So I was like right before it was my senior year of high school and my senior year of college, the Olympics. Obviously, the Summer Games didn't really count for that. And so it was my senior year of college. I was living with 3 guys, and I was watching 24/7, and they were so annoyed. There was one TV, and they were not happy with me. And the first few days, it was fun. Let's watch the Olympics together. And then by day 5, they were done, and I was just beginning. And so I think you have to have that endurance. I think the same thing, now by like day 12 or 13, my wife gets a little tired of it. This year I have the excuse by saying like, it's my job. I have to watch it, which I can't wait to use. I don't know how long that's going to last. Yeah, you just have to be dedicated and take it also, I think, like, how cool is it that you can watch it 24/7? Like, the best part to me about working from, obviously we're all working from home now, or, many of us still are. I can have like 3 screens going and no one's going to judge me. Like, that's awesome. I don't think I'll get much work done, but that's okay, I guess. It's only 2 weeks, so it's not too bad. There's some weekends there. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's just the coolest thing. Have like 3 events going on at once.
I was going to ask about multiple screen strategies.
Definitely, if you have like a dual monitor setup, which I have on the computer, that's a good way to start. You get you can get one monitor and the TV. The phone is underrated. It can work too. Like, this is what I do with like March Madness too. You have to sort of stagger what's important. You don't need to see every single minute of every event, but if you kind of know when things are getting interesting, you don't have to watch the first heat of a swimming event, but like, you got to be ready for the final one. I think if you sort of learn that, and I think I do this often throughout the day. It's like, all right, what's on in prime time? Like, what's going to be a replay? What can I watch live? Obviously it's very easy to just turn it on in prime time and you'll get a good gist of the games, but some of the exciting stuff, especially given when there's a time difference like there will be this time, being able to watch some of those things live is pretty exciting. And it's just more opportunities to watch and, to learn more. We've been delayed a year, so I feel like we have to like get as much as we possibly can.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy. You can follow Jeremy on Twitter. He is at JAF78. He was a lot of fun. The book is a lot of fun.
The book is a lot of fun. And I do want to mention that we never talk to an Olympic historian without getting into some Avery Brundage talk. And
that is correct.
We have saved that for our special patrons.
Right. So to get that bonus audio, you can go to patreon.com/flamealivepod and select one of the levels that offers bonus audio every month. You get a special show just for you.
Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
Yes, it is time to check in with our team Keep the Flame Alive, who are past guests of our show. This week, some tough news for our para-equestrian rider, Sydney Collier. She was named to be an alternate for this year's Paralympics, but the good thing is she gets to travel with the team to Tokyo. And you're part of the team. I will say that. It's better than not being on the team.
She's going to camp, and they will be heading to Tokyo.
So, congratulations to Sydney.
Coinciding with her departure as the member of the IOC, Kikkan Randall has stepped down from her role on the USOPC Board of Directors as well.
And our Paralympian John Register was emceed the opening of the Park Union Bridge in downtown Colorado Springs. So
Olympic City.
Exactly. Bunch of Tokyo 2020 news as always. If you're driving down the highway or in one of some select cities across America, you might see the Olympic rings because NBC is trucking them around in their Rings Across America tour, which is kind of, it is a massively long semi with like the middle cut out. And the rings are on a pedestal, are just like propped up on little a stand. And then there's just a Tokyo signage around it.
Will they throw me some Oreos?
I think it would be nice, just from the truck. Throw them out.
Yeah, like they throw beads at Mardi Gras.
Right. So it was first in Los Angeles over this past weekend. Then it's on its way to Chicago for a July 9th stop. Then to Miami, Orlando, Washington, D.C., and New York City. It gets to New York opening day, and it will be at Rockefeller Plaza. The rings will cover 8,000 miles of roads and visit 25 states. So maybe you will see them. Bad news in coming out of Tokyo is that COVID cases are rising, and they really are rising. They were like a couple hundred, and now they're in like the 500-600s. So that's not great news. It's very worrisome for the organizing committee, for the government. So the organizing committee is considering postponing the announcement of the ticket lottery results, which were supposed to be announced on July 6th. Now it may be a wait and see because we may have to change the limit on spectators again. Because right now it's maximum 10,000 or 50% of the venue, but they may have to take that 10,000 number down. Kind of crummy news if you're a Japanese athlete. The Kyoto News is reporting that you will only be eligible to take part in the opening and closing ceremonies if you're staying at the athletes' village around that time, or eligible to stay at the athletes' village around that time. So that's part of all of the regular steps. That's kind of a bummer because you're already somewhat local, and it would be, that whole... You walk in as the host nation and the stadium goes crazy moment. That's really something that a lot of athletes have mentioned to us is so powerful. But it's really kind of a bummer that some of these athletes will not get to have those moments. The Japanese Olympic Committee has also told sports federations that athletes will not be allowed to take photos with their smartphones or cameras when they march in the stadium. No reason why, but maybe it's because they'll want to be close to each other. And just like, oh, hey, let's take a picture of you and me or whatever. But that's also kind of rough.
Or maybe they're just using it as an excuse because they're tired of seeing all the athletes walk around with their phones.
I think, but I also get it from the athlete's perspective. Like, I got to capture this moment.
Right. Remember when John McLeod was telling us how he, back in 76, tried to sneak his Kodak Instachrome into the. He has one sort of blurry picture. So it's a once in a lifetime event. Exactly. So understood both ways here.
Mm-hmm. Also, some frustrating news from inside the games. Samoa has closed its borders due to COVID. So that affects the athletes who are currently in the country. If they're in the country, they can't get out of the country, and that means they can't go to Tokyo to compete in the games because they don't know when this ban will be lifted. So that affects 3 weightlifters, so they will not be competing this year. Athletes from Samoa who are currently training in other countries, they can go to Japan, but they can't go to Samoa when they're done.
I'm very worried now.
Are you? I don't like the spike.
I don't like the spike. The bloom is definitely off the rose. Mm-hmm. I wonder if I'm even going to be able to enjoy it all that much.
That's a good question. I kind of wonder if we need to see more teams arriving, and if we can get through a few countries coming in and there's no cases that get off the plane.
Because there is no way that this is going to come off well in the media. Certainly not in the U.S.
Right.
We just know the narrative has already been written. Mm-hmm. Maybe Simone Biles can go flip over something and distract everybody.
I hope so.
Maybe she can do a triple pike and that we'll be talking about that forever.
I hope so. And the sad thing is, only time will tell. Come on, Japan. Come on, athletes, delegations. Let's do our part.
You know who doesn't get COVID?
Who?
Dogs. That's why I still say dogs should be in the Olympics.
Oh, maybe someday. What would be fun is if there was new Paralympic competitions. So instead of running with a guide runner, you run with your guide dog.
I would love that. Anything to have a dog involved. My dog will make me feel better and make me more excited.
There you go.
She watches it with me, so she's definitely an Olympic fan.
There we go. There we go. Well, that will do it for this episode. Let us know what you think about the ongoing COVID situation in Japan.
Email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com or call or text us at 208-352-6348. That's 208-FLAME-IT. We're Flame Alive Pod on Twitter and Insta, and Keep the Flame Alive podcast group on Facebook.
Join us on Thursday when we are going to have historian Georgia Servin on to talk about the evolution of women's gymnastics. So as we go out to music by Mercury Sunset, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep the flame alive.
Sometimes you think that you are in a movie. I stalk the recreation of what's inside. Sometimes you think that life is just a journey, an endless search for meaning you'll never find. And I never had a reason, but I always had a feeling that it will break me if I go. So take me back to Tokyo, and it will break me if I go. So take me back to Tokyo, and it will break me if I go. So take me back to Tokyo, just to see your face.
Subscribe to our Patreon feed. It's www. Who says that?
Okay, Grandma.
Right?